So that's going to be there. Now, we also, on the left-hand side, we can find these categories. So if you're used to these categories, these cycles, vendor cycle, customer cycle, payroll cycle, then those are in essence on the left-hand side. And again, they kind of changed the name for them. Now, before I go into this panel on the left, I just want to point out that the online program has been toying with different panels over here. And they're just going to continue to do that, I believe. I think they went way too far, a little bit too crazy before, using very casual terms. And so when we went to this drop down over here, you could toggle between an accountant view and a business view. And they tried to make the business view kind of the default view. And it was too cheeky. It was too, for a lot of people that wanted a professional software, I think was the problem. So they A/B tested it for a long time, and basically they're back to, in essence, the accountant view as the default view. Why did the other one fail? I believe it's because they used terms that were too casual, too kind of flippant, which weren't as specific. They weren't tied into the accounting language that's traditional, and they kind of almost felt like they were mocking the accounting department, the accounting process, it kind of felt like to me. So I don't know. I tried to get used to it, but now they went back. They're basically going back to this default kind of format using kind of more professional layout and language. But they might change that at the flip of a coin, right? That's what they do on QuickBooks. And if they do, everything will be the same. It's just that now they thought it would be cool to make all the names change or something like that. So it's really a superficial change because the double entry accounting system is the same. But now we have to, that's why we're going to update the course from time to time so that we can look at whatever the current layout is that they are dealing with. So the reason these cycles are important, remember, if you're just basically building your books from the bank account, then you don't really need to deal with these centers too much because basically you don't need to deal with YouTube just pays you if you're a gig worker and you get paid by YouTube or whatever. Then you don't have to really deal with them. But if you have to invoice the client, then it becomes important because I want to go to the customer center because that is where I'm going to track who owes us the money and try to follow up on the payment. So that over here, it's called the sales item. So the tab is sales. It's got the drop down over here. So if we go into sales, then you've got your tabs up top and the main customer is over here. So whenever we deal with customers, this is where we go. So, and that usually means we're dealing with customers most of the time with types of businesses where we have to do the work first, invoice the client, and then collect on the money. Or possibly we got a prepayment situation. They paid us in advance for work that we're going to do later. Each of those scenarios means that we can't just say, oh, they came into the cash register, they bought something, it's over. We don't have to deal with that customer anymore. I don't have to track anything in the database system. But if we have to track the invoice, then it becomes very important to track the customer information and will be in here a lot. Similarly, on the payable side of things, I used to call that, so you might call this the sales cycle center or the customer center would be the old name. What about on the vendor side, which would be the vendor center? That would be this expenses. So the expenses over here is what we used to call basically the vendor center. And you've got then your vendors here. So this similarly, and most small businesses might not have as much dealing with the vendor centers because they might just be paying off the whatever comes due either with a cash or a credit card. In other words, you're going to try to automate everything as much as you can for utility bills and electric bills and so on. And if I automate it, then I can just pay it as they become due using the bank feeds and automate the process, and I don't have to track my vendor information because, once again, I don't have to actually deal with the vendors. I just pay them when they become due. Larger companies tend to need more tracking of the bills because what happens then is they're saying, hey, I have so many transactions that it doesn't make sense for me to pay the bill when it becomes due. I want to pay it as late as possible. In other words, if I'm paying a utility bill and it costs me $75, it doesn't matter if I pay it today or 15 days from now when it is actually due. But if I'm paying, $7,000 per transaction, then it becomes significant. That 15 days becomes significant. Or if I have thousands of transactions that are happening, then it's going to become significant. That 15-day period is going to matter with our cash flow money supply as well as with the time value of money. And that's when the accounts payable tracking becomes more and more valuable. So, and then of course we have the payroll, and that's going to be the payroll cycle or the customer center, the employee center. Now the payroll, we're going to talk about and touch in on it. We have a whole nother course on payroll just in and of itself, because there's a lot of different options that you can deal with payroll. You're going to have to pay for payroll no matter what you do, unless you try to do it by hand, which I don't recommend doing, at least not in the United States, because there's so many laws and regulations, including those that have tax implications, that payroll has become kind of a specialty in and of itself. So either we pay for payroll, track it within the payroll center, or we hire a third party to basically help us with payroll, or we might not have payroll because we might just be a sole proprietor or something like that, which would mean that we don't have to deal with that. Or maybe you can get by with contractors, but be careful to make sure that they qualify as contractors if you do that. So those are the major centers over here. I might go into a little bit more depth on the rest of them,